Hi, thank you for tuning in to the Logic of God podcast. I'm Cody.
I'm Gina.
And I'm Ben.
If you're returning, thank you for coming back. And if you are a new guest, welcome.
So,
Thus saith the Lord.
thus saith the Lord that Ben is here.
I'm back, baby. It is great to be back at the farm.
We are on the front porch. There is a miter saw next to Ben. There are moths and the moon, and it is a lovely evening.
I feel so incredibly manly. Look at all this manly stuff on this porch.
So we've only been on Exodus chapter 8 for what, a month now? 3 weeks?
It's been a hot minute, yeah.
But we are finally to the final plague of Exodus chapter 8. There are more plagues. So we're going to run through Exodus chapter 8, verses 20 and on in the ESV, and then we will have our chat.
All the way up to 32.
Yay. The great thing about these episodes is that Cody really dug deep and wrote a really good outline. So if you would like this outline to follow along and just have the extracurricular resources, it's been fun, and we've had some people request, and it's definitely worth taking a look at. So something to think about.
How you doing, Matt?
Yay. Thank you, Matt. And Jennifer said it too. Okay. So the fourth plague, flies. See, this is a sticking point for me because flies are not that different than gnats, right?
We have the experience of both of them.
I know. In the last week, we've gotten little gnats.
So we have the little drain flies now popping up. It's that time of season. And they came out of order for us if we're doing plagues, though, because when we first came here, the flies were crazy.
We've had flies since we interviewed Albert.
But now we have the gnats. So I would say they're different. And
I know they are, but God, get a little more creative. But it's all bugs.
No, this is one of those ones that there's some different interpretations to. Yeah. Some people will pigeonhole this one into scarabs, so it fits the Egyptian scarab god.
Interesting.
But I just don't think. I think it's a stretch texture. I think it's closer to the literal fly that we all
know and hate.
Yes.
All right, so jumping in. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Rise up early in the morning and present yourself to Pharaoh as he goes out to the water, and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, let my people go that they may serve me. Or else, if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you and your servants and your people and into your houses. And the houses of the Egyptians shall be filled with swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they stand. But on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people dwell, so that no swarms of flies shall be there, that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. Thus I will put a division between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall happen.' And the Lord did so. There came great swarms of flies into the house of Pharaoh and into his servants' houses. Throughout all the land of Egypt, the land was ruined by the swarms of flies." Should we pause or should we keep going?
Keep going, I think.
Then Pharaoh called Moses, and Aaron said, "Go sacrifice to your God within the land." But Moses said it would not be right to do so, for the offerings we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God are an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? We must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he tells us. So Pharaoh said, "I will let you go to sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, only you must not go very far away. Plead for me." Then Moses said, "Behold, I am going out from you, and I will plead with the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. Only let not Pharaoh cheat again by not letting the people go to the sacrifice to the Lord." So Moses went out from Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord. And the Lord did as Moses asked and removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also and did not let the people go. There's so much here. I keep thinking, oh yeah, it's just one plague. We're going to get through. It's just flies.
Now, it's funny you should say it's just flies. Is this even flies?
Dun, dun, dun.
Is it?
So, if we go to the original language, there is no mention of the word fly. It's literally just swarms. No flies. It's just the unleashing of the swarms on Egypt. Even Onkelos does not mention flies either. What it says instead is swarms of animals, of wild animals. For if you do not send out my people, behold, I will send against you and your servants and your nation and your houses swarms of wild animals. The houses of Egypt will be full of the wild animals, and so too the ground upon which they stand. Onkelos just has it as tons and tons of random animals.
Snakes and boars and iguanas.
And I do love Onkelos, and that doesn't mean that it's always right or anything, but I do find it interesting that the Babylonian translation of this passage doesn't mention flies or even insects at all. It's just swarms. So what do we think? Is flies reasonable? Is it unreasonable?
The thing that keeps catching me up tripping me up on these, like on gnats and on flies, is like, I have flies right now. Like we have been haunted by flies for a while as a curse, that it feels that way at least. And there have been flies that have literally materialized in parts of our house that have no explanation. And it just feels like spiritual attack. So I know what it's like to be under attack from flies. Granted, not covering every single surface of where I'm standing, but pretty darn close. And so for me, like knowing how gross they are, how disease-ridden they are, like how their maggots behave, like I have to say, and I'm a very tidy person, so this is not a cleanliness issue. This is a spiritual issue to me. If the Egyptians were swarmed with gnats and flies, to me, this would bring disease. This would kill off livestock. This would destroy plants. This would, like, really, even in one day of a plague, like, which it's, to me, I interpret this as like it happened in one day and was gone, similarly to the first plague. I don't know that I buy that it's these disease-carrying insects. I don't know what I think they are fully, but it's really difficult for me to agree that they're flies, except for the Lord of the Flies callback in the New Testament. Like, that's it. But knowing how dirty and diseased these creatures are, I just really struggle, because disease comes later in the plagues. So, like, to me, it's questionable. What about you, Cody?
I think it's flies. You see the progression of plagues, and it's not to full terror yet. The water was inconvenient. They were still able to find other water. You have the frogs, which were disgusting and smelled, but were not people dying or injury or real negative impact. You don't have death until the next plague after this, it seems. Maybe disease or something caused death, but the text doesn't talk about it.
No, it doesn't.
To me, flies make sense in the progression or the increasing severity of the plague cycle here. And you have that reiterated in the Wisdom of Solomon that kind of walks through this as well. It talks about how the plagues increased little by little to allow for the judgment and the overcoming of, or turning to Yahweh as the true God. So flies make sense to me, logically.
It certainly can be. The difficulty is that there isn't a perfect one-for-one word in the Hebrew. I don't know if there is an actual Hebrew word for flies. Maybe there is. But at the very least, if there is, it's not used here. It's simply the swarms. And also, to be fair, swarms is frequently used for insects. And that makes sense. Just like in English, we say swarms for insects as well. So it does reasonably make sense that it's insects and not swarms of just random wild animals. like a whole menagerie of animals just stampede, like giraffes and
Noah's Ark
hippos.
emptied.
Yeah, it's just like I'm picturing Moses showing up into Pharaoh's court, and his arms are like pushed up, and there's a random dog under one arm. There's a hyena next to one, and there's a giraffe standing over him, like resting its head on its chin on his head. And he's like, "All right, Moses, this has got to stop. This is crazy. I don't." So yeah,
Moses' circus.
as funny as that would be, I think that also logically that doesn't follow too well either. Just referencing swarms, like tons and tons of just random wild animals, because while Pharaoh's reaction is pretty emphatic here, it's not desperate, like you said, Cody. And things get much more desperate later on. And I do think that stampeding hordes of wild animals, one, would have been very difficult to get rid of. And two, when we saw larger animals like frogs being brought to saturate all of Egypt, the way God dealt with those is they died. And I have seen some people try to connect the death of the tons of frogs to the emergence of the gnats as well as the flies. That I could see that, but the whole point is that these are supposed to be miraculous conjurings by God.
That's what we talked about in the last episode. If you're going to try to logic your way into believing how something happened instead of just created from dust, you're discrediting all of Genesis too.
Mm-hmm. And I see your point, Cody, also in that there's a slight escalation. Flies are a larger insect and they are more of a nuisance. And having swarms of flies, like gnats, you can ignore. They're annoying and difficult, but you can get by with ignoring them. Flies are much harder. They make a lot more noise. They're a lot bigger. They land on your food and they devour it, and they make all kinds of a mess. So I can see why Pharaoh would suddenly want to say, okay, look, this is enough. I can't.
Yeah, but we have kids. How many times do you have to tell your kid to do something before you spank them?
Way too many.
Is 4 enough?
No, what do you call it? The Jesus spanking? That's getting ready to come.
Oh, yes.
And I think one of the ways you can, to me, connect these to a more nuisance rather than like a devastation is the words that they don't use. There's words for locust, and that's another plague later. There's words for other insects or other animals, like of it just being a stampede or something. I think those words would have been used instead of the swarms one.
So one of my lectures that I sat through talked about bugs being translated or mistranslated to animals, but I can't cite my sources. This is just off the top of my memory.
Again, pointing to onkelos, that's the way onkelos translates it. So there seems to be something up in the air, but again, I don't see the logical move from gnats to just chipmunks and squirrels and gators and hippopotami. What animals? It's not a very logical progression in my eyes. And then after that, we jump to what's the next? I believe it's boils.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or no, the livestock dying.
Yeah, the livestock dying.
So yeah, jumping from tons and tons of animals just invading every house, and then God just kind of ushering them out. Okay, go on.
But the Egyptian children are like, Mommy's my pet now.
We love him. And then the next chapter, they die. Like, actually, no, maybe that kind of works. It's like, no, God gives them a bunch of pets and then they all die in the next chapter.
I don't know.
Oh, that's horrible. But no, I don't believe that's what's going on. It makes more sense that this is another kind of insect. And also, there has to be the question, what would be culturally significant to the Egyptians?
This is where it gets a little bit hilarious for me, because so if you look at Cody's outline here, he talks about the deity that's connected to this specific one. I think it's Khepri, something like that, Khepri. And it's a scarab associated deity. This is what I find really funny, okay? Because until I had done the research for this episode, I had no idea what a scarab really was. I was like, oh, it's a cool beetle. I've seen scarab jewelry and hieroglyphics, including scarabs and all of that. And I knew that it was meaningful to the Egyptians, but I didn't know that it was a literal dung beetle. For people who are obsessed with hygiene and think that Ma'at is the ultimate peace, they're worshiping a little poop peddler.
And surprisingly, it's a similar situation with flies. So I'm agnostic on whether or not it's scarabs versus flies. I think I'm with you, Cody. Flies is probably more likely as an escalation. If you're viewing this as an incremental series of punishments, a swarm of flies definitely makes sense. But either way, you see this odd thing where the Egyptians look at things that we would normally expect to be associated with uncleanliness, and the Jews eventually associate with uncleanliness via decree by God. But the Egyptians are like, no, they're great. This is from nilescribes.org. The fly also bore the burden of use as a more impressive symbol. During the New Kingdom, large fly pendants were given to officials to reward military achievements. As royal awards, these fly pendants were larger than their amuletic counterparts, made exclusively of gold, and given in conjunction with other gold rewards like the Gold of Honor. Amhos Pen Nekbet records in his autobiography that Tutmos I awarded him 2 bracelets, 4 necklaces, 1 armlet, 6 golden flies, 3 golden lions, and 2 golden axes for serving him on the battlefield.
And we talked about this. I don't know if you remember, but back in our Angels and Demons series, this was brought up. Just so you know.
I don't even remember that.
Yeah. No, because I found that 2 years ago.
I completely forgot about that.
No, take the credit. It's not about credit. It's just, it all connects. This is all connected.
So both with the scarabs, which if you've ever seen the movie The Mummy, everyone's like, oh yeah, scarabs, they're like all over the place in Egypt, but also flies. This association with the filthy insects we would recognize as filthy today, of handling the refuse and the disgusting things that society would throw away, for some reason they associate them with bravery or power or authority, which is strange.
I think one of the most amazing moments of my faith was sitting in a class and hearing about how different civilizations did not understand human cleanliness. And God literally gives instructions for hand washing in the Bible. He tells people how to have good hygiene and what to do if something is unclean. We still do that today. And that was revealed directly by God in the Bible. Were the Egyptians obsessed with cleanliness? Sure, maybe. But they were also doing really weird stuff that we look back on and we're like, oh, that's not so smart. They were geniuses in some ways, and we don't even know how they did a lot of the stuff that they did or learned some of the stuff that they did. And yet, it's a lot of idiocy. Human hygiene with poop, with scarabs, like with flies. Flies are attracted to human waste. To me, this is a message from God. He's like, okay, the Hebrews, they're not going to get flies. You're going to get flies all over you because you're a turd.
Yeah, so there's some interesting connections in this one for me. So this is the first plague that Israel is separated from and doesn't experience. We covered a little bit of the Luke and the finger of God chapter last week, but that kind of continues on in this week. And I want to read the rest of Luke there, or the next part of Luke. So we read 11:14, and I want to continue on so that you have the finger of God that we covered in that, and the casting out of demons, and it being the finger of God, Beelzebub and Beelzebul. But the end, 23, it says, whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. So you have God delineating his chosen people here, and whoever is not with them is going to be judged now. And further connection, I think, of what points to this Exodus story in Luke, that Jesus is making this connection, is the Egyptians were not with me. They were against me, and they got scattered. And you see that pop up in Israel's story too, throughout Israel's history. And when they start worshiping other gods, they end up being scattered. But the further connection there. And we hinted at the idea of this is God challenging their creation story with the judgment of the gods. And I think there's also a subtle hint to God recreating Eden here. He's separating a non-chaotic land. So you have the wilderness outside of Eden that is just pure chaos. And this would attack the realms that we've talked about, the Mot that all of the Egyptian gods are supposed to be protecting and upholding, this idea of order and justice that God is challenging, but also challenging their identity in creation as well. And differentiating himself from these other gods that Egypt worshipped as the actual creator God, and reestablishing Eden here in the Israel idea in the Goshen that is going to end up being exodus out of this area and spreading the Eden idea from Israel, from the land of Canaan, out to the rest of the world, being the example and spreading that out. So to me, there's also a subtle hint to another creation connection here that God is doing with challenging the Egyptians' gods' idea of creation and order and putting it on Israel.
I think that's a really interesting take. And I find that it's weird. If you analyze under that mindset that you just shared, Pharaoh's response of, you can go, but don't go so far away. Like, why does he really care? Is he afraid to lose the slaves and their labor? Because he made them effectively useless, taking away the straw so that they couldn't make good bricks. What was the point of keeping them? They were just mouths to feed at that point. So is this the acknowledgement of Pharaoh to say, you guys are special and I want what you have and I'm going to try to figure out how to get it? He doesn't have the fear of God yet, but he understands that this is more powerful than anything he's ever seen. Is that a good explanation for why he's saying what he's saying when he's negotiating here?
It could be. Like, to me, this is still him conceding anything at all is challenging his godship. So any idea or any level in this, negotiation, this battle, this contest, the idea that he is in a battle and just utterly losing, it's like those guys you negotiate with in business. They just want to win. You got to make them feel like they got to win before you get that yes. God's not going to do that for him. God has all the cards. He has all the eggs in his basket. He doesn't have to give Pharaoh a win here. And that seems what Pharaoh is trying to hold out for. Is that you've seen Pawn Stars where it's like they go back and forth and I'm not going to pay a penny more than this. Just give me 5 cents so I feel like I've won. I think that's what Pharaoh is trying to do here.
I don't agree.
Because if he gives in completely, then he is saying he's not God. Like,
these are the most intelligent, inventive leaders of humanity at this point. There's no way in my mind that Pharaoh didn't think there was a way to harness what God was capable of.
I don't know that's the case, because in order for him to harness something from God directly, he would have to worship God. You can harness, in the Egyptians' perspective, in their paradigm, you can harness things from the Egyptian gods because they are your gods. You can borrow from them, you can take from them, they can teach you things. God similarly can do that. However, he's not your God. The only way to get something from him, from the ancient perspective, is to treat him as your God, as to abandon your gods and then serve him. And we see something similar in the New Testament with Simon the sorcerer, where he tries to pay money so that he can do miracles like the apostles can. And he's told he can't. That's just not the way that it works. And he has to be humbled and he has to give up this feeling that somehow it's his. So even if we go down that route and say that Pharaoh is trying to usurp some power, there's still an enormous amount of humble pie he has to eat in order to go that direction.
I don't think God would kill his firstborn unless he were thinking these things. And I really believe that if you look at the context of mythology from that time frame, it was very commonplace in their stories for these gods to fight and win and lose over each other. He very well may have thought that he could beat God.
Wait, there's potential in that idea. The idea that he's trying to take power from God, who he views as superior, and make it his own, I don't know. I don't know that I would see that in the text. But the idea of him viewing himself as being greater than God, despite everything that he's seen, I would say that it's overused, but it does feel like he is a narcissist, that he does feel like he is the center of his own universe. And I think the interactions that we see, where even at like much later, even after he's defeated, even after it's been proven that he does not have the same measure of power that God does, and that God can do anything that he wants to Egypt and the Egyptians, he still tries to go after the Hebrews and murder them all, even after everything that happens. The man is clearly
Crazed.
very arrogant. He's very proud. He strikes me as an actual narcissist.
Yeah, but a narcissist wants to overpower everybody, including God.
Yeah, and we do actually see that to an extent here. And this actually goes to something that we were discussing earlier. So there's the passage, only let not Pharaoh cheat again by not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. And that's in verse 29. It's a long verse. But the Hebrew word here is hatel. And it's interpreted as act deceitfully, but oftentimes it's used in terms of mockery. Frequently throughout the rest of the Old Testament, every time this word is used, it's used in reference to someone making a mockery of something, acting arrogantly. Yes, dealing deceitfully, but often in a way that's meant to demean or to put beneath. And so effectively, Moses is warning Pharaoh. He's saying, don't try to put God beneath you by lying. And I do think that Pharaoh sees himself so highly, despite everything that he's seen, that he does think he can put God beneath him, that he can lie to him, that he can trick him.
He doesn't understand the qualities of the true God. He understands from his own worldview what gods are capable of. And I think he's still got the real God, our God, in a box of like, this is the way of things. And so this God must be in this way of things because it's like a very structured, strict worldview that prevents learning. That's part of why I think we're called in the New Testament to be teachable, like to keep our hearts soft. Like Jennifer shared with the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, keep your heart soft like butter. I really do see that here, and I think that's the meaning of the hardened heart above and beyond anything else. He just isn't willing to learn the lesson that God is teaching. And it's sad because it does continue to escalate. And it was stated beforehand by God how it was going to go. And a lot of people struggle with that. God predetermined it and hardened his heart. What a cruel puppet master. But I think it's really just God knew how far Egypt was going to push this.
When once again, we see the use of the word hardened. Pharaoh's heart was hardened. No, again, the Hebrew is vayakbed. He made his own heart heavy. He showed his unrighteousness, his unworthiness of upholding the concept of ma'at. He's showing over and over again how foolish and stupid he is and arrogant he is, and he doesn't even realize it.
We do.
We can be pretty arrogant as people, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Certainly. I agree with that.
It's hard to imagine being as arrogant as Pharaoh is being. And yet we do see that repeatedly manifest throughout the entirety of the Old and the New Testament. We see people who hear words from Jesus and even the disciples, and they act like morons. Peter is literally like, no, I would never deny you. And then Jesus literally tells him, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. He's like, no, I wouldn't. I'd never do that.
And then Jesus is like, Peter, do you love me? Multiple times. And it's like a little mind game and it's really cute and I love it. God gets his cake and he eats it too.
It is easy to point at Pharaoh and talk about how obscenely arrogant he's being. But yeah, we can be just as arrogant.
Look at what the Israelites do. When a very short span of time, they leave Egypt and they do all kinds of dumb things that drive me up a wall. You had flies all over Egypt and God, but I'm going to protect my people. And instead of being humble and being like, wow, God, thank you, they're like, nee, 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 nee.
And the implication is that it's not because of how righteous the people are being. It's not about the Hebrews themselves. Because we saw earlier they effectively blasphemed God by accusing him of wrongdoing. Moses did the same. And Cody, you pointed out in Ezekiel, it makes it abundantly clear that even at this time period, there were many Hebrews who were worshiping false gods, and we see that manifest again in the wilderness when they worship the 2 golden calves. These are not a whole bunch of people united under the singular objective of worshiping the one true God. God has something to offer them, and they're trying to use God just like Pharaoh's trying to use God. And the second God disappears, seemingly, even though God's still there, they abandon him and they're like, let's go back to worshiping the gods we had before.
This is such a good response to the problem of evil. Like, so many people are like, I can't believe in God. I can't be a Christian because how could a God allow children to be murdered and starved and all of the bad things happen that happen? Look at this situation, okay? God was so patient. And you hear words like, plead for me from Pharaoh. We have unrighteous people that hit rock bottom all the time that are like, pray for me. And like, okay, yes, I will pray for you. But your relationship with the Lord requires action, allegiance, repentance, a statement. And usually for these situations, it's like, if God doesn't give me what I want to resolve this problem, he's not real and he's a monster. But not only did God take his time with these plagues, one at a time, okay, maybe it was in a short time span, but then you have the Israelites who got the freedom that they were seeking and threw it away. Many of them threw it away. Many of them died on the way or were killed by the Lord on the way or were disloyal to the Lord on the way, didn't even make it into the promised land, Moses included. It took years, decades for God to bring that righteousness. And when you're in the tension of free will and sin nature and fallen world, in combination with the righteousness and justice of God, it is so nuanced. And it's impossible to say that God is a moral monster like we've talked about before, because the problem of evil is us. It's our response to God. It's our response to one another. And justice and righteousness being the Lord's, he's going to work it out how he's going to work it out. And sometimes it takes that long. It can't be okay for Moses and not also be okay for us.
Yeah, I wish I could better articulate the idea too, like the whole idea that the darkness is truly just the absence of light. And I think the same, and we've talked about it before, but evil is just the absence of God or good. So evil is the people's absent of God. That only exists because they're not close. They're not reflecting. That's why evil exists in this world. If we were perfectly connected, aligned to God, as after the second coming and the day of the Lord happens, that's why the evil doesn't continue on in heaven. That is like the scriptural reason. It's not because we don't have the ability or free will anymore. It's that the absence of God, the removing that Adam caused, the separation that Adam caused in the Garden of Eden, the connection has been restored. It's just waiting for the day of the Lord. We have the light, so there's no more darkness. We'll be in the light because we'll be connected to God. We won't be separated anymore because the sacrifice that Jesus has made. Evil is the absence of God.
But the justice is what takes the time. God is going to enforce his will, which is not always what we want. And it ends up being just because it's God's. I just think anybody who looks at this story, I say all the time, I'm reclaiming the vacation Bible stories that we get as children that are like infantilized versions that don't get the details right all the time. You cannot take the stories from the Old Testament, from Genesis through this, like that's where we've studied so far, and be like, yeah, that's fair. And then look at life today and be like, but that's unfair. The standard hasn't changed for the Lord's justice. And like even the most wicked Pharaoh, God heard and relented. When Moses pled for him on his behalf, interceded for him. And this is like true intercessory prayer. God listened. He did it. He responded so individually here and so patiently. And I think God is so patient with us, and he gives us these escalating reminders. And the saddest part is that the death of the firstborn, that's us. That's our eternity. if you really apply it to today's life, we are the death of the firstborn. We are excluded from that safety in the Passover. And if we don't get it right and we don't repent and we don't go to God ourselves instead of asking somebody else to intercede on our behalf, all will be lost. And we can learn so much from this. It's not just a cute story. It's not just, oh, flies, whatever. This is the sign that God heard Pharaoh, and Pharaoh still pushed.
I think you hit on something good there, because if you believe the Bible, this is an explanation of, and I think I brought it up on one of the last ones, but God's slowness to anger, God's slowness to just obliterate everybody. He's not just quick to anger. He truly, what is the Peter verse that, he wants everybody to be saved? I can't.
The Lord is not slow at bringing forth his promises to fruition, but he'd rather every knee bow because he loves us.
And it was his will that none should perish.
Yes.
I think this is proof of that. This is not the same Sodom and Gomorrah where you have Abraham pleading, there has to be somebody there worth saving, and there's not. There's clearly somebody here who needs to hear God's message 10 different ways before they're saved, and he's doing that. He is slow and does wish everybody be saved, but there's a point where Pharaoh clearly, no matter what happens to the guy, is not going to relent and give in and rejects God entirely. And the common argument nowadays is, if God presented himself face to face with me, there's no way anybody would ever say no. But if you believe what Scripture is saying here, I don't know how clear God can be. I'm here. Here I am.
I'm listening.
I'm dismantling your entire worldview in front of you. Here I am. You questioned, I don't know who God is. This is me. I am the God. I am the Alpha and Omega. I'm above all other gods. This is who I am. Repent. Come with me. Do I think God was deceitful here? No, absolutely not. I think Pharaoh could have repent here, and this story could have gone completely different. That's not what we have, and that's not how people respond to God. And it's sad.
And I'm sure that there are people who will be like, yeah, but God knew this was going to happen anyway.
Yeah, it was predetermined.
Either it was predetermined or he simply knew. And I would say, yes, he definitely knew. He exists in all times. He exists in the future where these choices have already happened.
And the text tells us he knew.
Yes. And yeah, at the very beginning of the story, he said that this was going to happen. So why go through all the pageantry? Why go through all the rigmarole? Why even bother with any of this? And the same question can be applied throughout the entirety of the Bible. Why bother testing Job if he already knew that Job was righteous? Why bother creating Adam and Eve if he already knew that they were going to sin? Why give anyone the opportunity if he knows that they're not going to do it? Oddly enough, it's in the book of Job that tells us the exact answer. It's not true until it happens. God does not punish people for things they would hypothetically do. And I understand there are some people who take that position, that for the people of this world that God doesn't reach, who'd never hear the gospel, the claim is they didn't get the gospel and they go to hell because God knew they wouldn't accept it anyway. Really, entire peoples, whole nations of people never hear the gospel for generations because God knew that none of them would accept him? No, that's not the way this works. Righteousness isn't real until it's shown or denied. Evil isn't real until it's enacted. God didn't judge Pharaoh before he did the evil act because that's not how justice works. And that's the whole point of the story of Job. The whole reason the devil comes out and God listens to what the accuser or the devil or whatever you think he is, what he has to say is because it's true. He says you can't say that he's righteous unless he has actually been tested and his righteousness is shown to be real. You can't punish Pharaoh for something he hasn't done until it is shown that he is as evil as he deserves to be punished for. It's like I can claim that I am the best baker in the world. Or better, I can claim that I love my family so much I would give my life for them. I can't tell you how many people I've heard say that kind of thing. But what happens the second the life is actually on the line, the second things get difficult, that's when you see people's true character come forward. And it sucks when that happens and people fail the test. And suddenly you find out the people you thought were your friend or the people you thought loved you when you loved, you find out that was skin deep, and it was only there because they were getting something out of it. That sucks, but reality is better than the fantasy.
If you look at God in the beginning of this story, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Before Pharaoh even had an opportunity, we read, and God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Without any background study, without any cultural context, sure, it does sound like God is at fault for making Pharaoh unmoving in making this decision to let the people go. But that's not the reality. And when you actually, like, this is the perfect example of being a Christian and seeking relationship with God. God, why? What did you mean? Why did you do that? Let me look at history. Let me talk to people, be teachable, learn from people who know more than me. And if I go to my pastor and he's like, I don't know, it's just, that's what it says, and we trust the Bible, that's not good enough for me. Okay, so let me find somebody else who might know. Let me ask a Bible scholar at a local college, whatever. But like, this is the desperate, starved pursuit of relationship with God and understanding, what did God mean by that? That's the question you should be asking. You shouldn't be jumping to the conclusion of God is evil or bad because he hardened Pharaoh's heart when you don't even know culturally what that means. There are so many cases of this with the Bible where people justify atheism or being agnostic or just walking away from their faith because they cannot understand. And this was one of the questions that Cody had when he was deconstructing. Like at the very beginning of our marriage, what does it mean that God hardened Pharaoh's heart and then killed his baby, his child that he loved, presumably he loved? How can you put that together? But when you study it and understand it like this, somehow it makes it better because I understand what God is doing. I see God's patience. I see God's response. He didn't just murder a little kid. He gave Pharaoh chance after chance. And then the natural escalation of what we're seeing, that's it.
No, and so the hardest part for me, just like in Job's story, and nobody ever talks about it or comments on it, but what about those kids? What about their salvation? What about their belief? They were judged and killed for their father's issue. So the, baby future Pharaoh, the firstborn of Pharaoh, was judged because of his father. How is that fair? How is that just God? The same in Job's story. And that's a question I haven't been able to answer. Job's family was murdered on Job's behalf, basically, because of Job's testing. And that's a difficult question. You could do the standard Christian ducking it,
Everything happens for a reason.
And God can do with those people what he will. Maybe they're saved, or maybe he judged them early, but that's not a good answer for me. And that's one of those questions I'm still going through.
But one of the things we talked about this week, Cody and I, was the Bible verse that the Lord will restore to you all of the years that the locusts have eaten. And I had seen this video that was a young man talking about the phrase, I want my mom, but not my mom. And I relate with that very, very profoundly because I don't have a relationship with a mom, and I don't have a healthy parent figure that I can go to share about my day just to tell them I ate a sandwich that was really good. I just don't have that person in my life. And I am an adoptee, and I went on Reddit, of all places, which is like the trash can of the internet, in my opinion. I don't enjoy being on Reddit, but I use it. It's actually very useful for certain things. And I met somebody on a message board for adoptees because I took some DNA tests and I really wanted to find my biological parents and solve some mysteries in my family tree. And I met this woman who agreed to help me and is now the person that I call and tell that I had a really good sandwich. And she's not my mom, and she didn't raise me, and she didn't know me as a kid. But she has been my friend for about 9 years now. And I have to say, that was the moment this week where I really understood what it meant. Like, the Lord will restore what the locusts have eaten. And the relationships and the situations that have hurt me and the babies that were taken away from me before I could even meet them, 3 of them. God has not given me replacements. It's not about getting same for same, but God has given me a very satisfying life. And I am content, not because God was like, you're right, you need a replacement. It was, I hear your cry. I understand that's something that you need. I understand that's something that you're wrestling with. And there is no resolution for the lost babies. That is what it is. I don't know. I don't think I'm ever going to have another child. However, God gave me in the last couple of years a career where I get to interact with babies and make sure that they're fed and make sure that they have a loving home and make sure that their parents know their rights and make sure that their parents are equipped. And that's as close as I can get to having another baby. Literally, delivering babies and teaching parents how to feed them and resourcing those families is literally as close as I can get. And I get to help people like my birth mom. So is it same? No, it's not. Does it replace what's been taken from me? Does it restore the childhood that I lost because I literally raised myself like a feral animal? No. But at least it's glorifying God, and at least those gaps are full. It's not fair. It doesn't make it better. I still wish I had a mom, but I do have someone I can call. I do have children. I do have a home. And all of the things that we've lost in the last couple of years, God has definitely found a way to make right. It's not about same. It's about using those gaps and trusting God in those gaps. And that's the hardest part. Because like when we lost our babies, I gave up. Nothing to add?
I don't think we should end on that.
No, you can't. And it's okay to disagree if it's something you don't agree on. Or if you're like listening and you're like so mad at what I just said. Let's talk.
Yeah, I don't think that answers the questions I have about the text in the regard to, it's a joke, but the animal activists you'll hear all the time. What about the dolphins? Dolphins are getting caught in the tuna nets. Dolphins are getting caught in the tuna nets. But nobody, those same activists aren't, what about the freaking tuna, guys? You care about the dolphins because they're cute and cuddly. And I feel like sometimes that's how apologists or even people trying to answer the problem of pain that pops up in Job focus on Job, the subject, but the children that got murdered for Job's sake, or the kids here in Egypt, like that goes unanswered. And that's my issue with the text here.
Yeah. And it's a reasonable issue to take.
So there's a measure of interconnectivity we have no matter what. Let's say that the only way Job could be tested is if things exclusively happen to Job. Would you say it's also simultaneously evil to cause his children to suffer at that same time because they have to watch their father suffer, and as a result, they share in their father's suffering?
No, I feel like it's very similar. You have a long drawn out punishment or an immediate punishment almost, or whatever you want to call it. Punishment's probably not the best word, but yes, I to both of those, I would still see an issue with. If they lived and suffered with Job through his suffering, it would be similar. What did they do for this?
And similarly, back when you guys were really struggling, back when you were living in Florida, it's not that I suffered the same way that you guys did, but because I love you guys and I'm close friends with you, much of the suffering that you had when you had to put your home up and then you felt it was being put on the altar and you really believed God was going to come in and help you, and then just like that, it was gone. Like, one, your children were suffering with you on top of that, but any suffering that you go through, your children are going to go through too. And any suffering you guys go through, your friends who love you are going to go through too. There is no way to purely isolate someone to where the suffering and testing that they undergo exclusively only affects them. Is that fair? No. But that's the nature of the interconnectivity of love, of what God calls us to do.
That's the sharing of the burdens. And I think also the iron sharpening the iron.
And So that's not a full explanation, but I think that's a partial explanation of the nature of why some people are allowed to suffer when they're not directly connected to the testing. You guys were being tested. I wasn't. I suffered in some way because you were being tested. Is that fair? No, but that's the way it is. And I got something from that struggling with you guys and trying to help. There was a development I went through as a result, a benefit that I got. Now, obviously, if I was dead, that wouldn't be there either. So I understand there is a difference between Job's kids being killed and Job's kids suffering along with Job. But that's a step. The first step is we're all connected. And as a result, what happens to one affects the other. And there is no way to sever that connection unless you have someone live alone in the woods and no one loves and cares about you.
It's a good sign that it bothers you that other people are going through those things. Encouraging.
No, and the best way and why I'm still a Christian is you got to look at grace and the sacrifice of Jesus. Don't deserve that either, but we still get to share in that because of the covenantal headship idea. And it's hard from a modern perspective to read the headship idea of the A&E and what the biblical authors were writing in and understanding that fully and how that works. But looking at grace on the other side and Jesus's sacrifice, we don't deserve to be saved either, but we are because of his sacrifice.
Yes, the unfairness goes in both directions.
Yes.
We're more than happy to allow the unfairness to benefit us. And we say it's actually righteous for God to show kindness and generosity to us if we don't deserve it. However, if a force other than God allows it to happen but doesn't do it directly, if the devil comes in and causes issues with your life and God allows it for the sake of virtue and the development of it and the exploration of it, well, suddenly that's a step too far. I'm fine with you blessing me when I don't deserve it, but punishing me when I don't deserve it or punishing someone else so that I can go through something, I can learn a lesson, that's just a step too far. That's unreasonable. That's unrighteous.
We don't talk about how Pharaoh ordered all these little kids killed, but we do talk about how unfair it is that God killed the firstborns.
Unfairness in many ways is baked into the cake, and yet at the same time it's not. In the end, we all die. In the end, we all are judged. In the end, we will all stand before the Lord Almighty and be given the same opportunity afforded to every single man, woman, and child, regardless of our status and our life lived before. All of us will be judged. And we can all take solace in the fact that there will be judgment. Now, that doesn't make it any easier to ingest the rough things that happen in life. But whenever I look at Job or whenever I look at anything else in the Bible, the unfairness that seems to manifest in the different parts of the Bible that it seems like elsewhere God is against us doing, the whole point is that God is looking to manifest true virtue. Job, through the unfairness of his family, got to manifest true absolute virtue he could not have experienced or expressed any other way. It's an ultimate good. And that ultimately brings up the question, if you ban things that would service the ultimate good, is that evil? If God said, no, you can't take his family, even though that would lead to the ultimate expression of righteousness, I will not allow you to do it. It's impossible. Hereby, I henceforth make it a law of the universe. I cannot affect anything, and no one else can affect anything to where anyone else is affected in an unfair way. Part of righteousness is reacting to unfairness. That's what makes you virtuous. So making that impossible makes true virtue impossible, or at least one of the greatest expressions of it impossible. Now, that's very high-minded thinking. That's very cerebral. And that's not the way that we're really geared to think. And it's difficult to think about virtue being the ultimate goal above all else. But when you think about it, that really is it. Why do you take care of your children? It's because you love them. Why do you sacrifice? Why do you keep doing things that hurt you day after day that they don't appreciate in the moment and maybe never will? It's because you love them. It's because of the possibility of the future, not the guarantee. If it was certain, it would be different. If you were certain how your children would turn out, would it make more sense logically for you to treat them with selflessness? At that point, it wouldn't be selflessness because you know how they would turn out. You know that they would appreciate it, and you know what would be a result.
It connects very well to the conversation we had before we recorded about disciplining children. if you're at that stage in your faith where you're on spiritual milk, you need your hand held a little bit more, that discipline feels pretty uncomfortable. I've gotten to a point now where I know when the Lord is disciplining me and I don't like it, but I can work with it. I think that level of discipline gets really tough in the beginning. And that's why Cody's life verse with the parable of the sower is one of the most important things you can do in your faith. But it takes laying groundwork and other people laying groundwork for you. And if the people who are working the field with you are also struggling with different things like sin and morality and virtue, then it makes it difficult to survive Christianity. So I can see why there's a lot of rage and a lot of hatred towards Christians, because there are people who've misrepresented and there are people who have not taught well and don't understand themselves and are teaching. And I don't know, if you're here listening, I'm glad you made it this far because we're still wrestling. We don't know it all.
I do want to set the record straight, and something you said earlier, Gina, about understanding the cultural and background, like understanding that in the Bible. I do think if you read Job from a cultural perspective, the author of Job answers the question that I struggle with, because if you read it from a headship perspective, like they would have been thinking, very early on in Job, it talks about him sacrificing for his family. So he, as the head, is the covering of his family. So they would have been saved, like in the ancient reader's mind when they're reading Job, because he's the one doing the sacrificing for the family as the head.
Even that's not a full explanation of why they had to die, or even if it was right for them to die.
Correct.
And I understand that struggle. It's a difficult one. No matter what, it's meant to be a tough pill to swallow. The whole story of Job is meant to be difficult. But there was a very long conversation we had with one of our listeners a while back on Facebook. And there was a question that I posed to this listener that he never fully was able to answer. And it's not that I blame him, because it's a very difficult one. But effectively, I asked him, from the perspective of Job, because a lot of people struggle with Job. If you have a child, you're bringing that child into the world knowing your child is going to die. It's a guarantee. You can't guarantee that your child is going to have a good life. You can guarantee that child is going to suffer. So, as a result, is it evil for you to bring a child into the world knowing that child will die and knowing the child will suffer? And that question I pose to you all. Is it evil to create a child when you know the child will die and you know the child will suffer? If you park a car on train tracks knowing that the train is going to come and hit the car and you have a child in the car, you're going to be charged for a crime.
I said a couple of years ago, and I say it occasionally when crazy stuff happens, but I tell Cody, if I would have known what I know now, like during the pandemic especially, I don't know if I would have had a baby at that time. I don't know that I would have children, but we can't know. Like, how could you know?
Even if you knew. I had another conversation with a different friend around these veins, and I asked him, was it wrong for people who had children in Ireland during the Irish potato famine, during periods where effectively the life expectancy was 18 years because of the sheer amount of infant mortality? The odds of you having a living baby were low. The odds of that child living to adulthood were low. In a world like that, was it evil for them to have children? No. The answer is no. It wasn't evil for them to have children then. It's not evil for you to have children now. It's literally the prerogative God gave us to be fruitful and multiply. But that question still remains. If you know that your child's going to die and you know your child will suffer, those are the only two guarantees you can really give. Why is it not?
But to know them and to love them.
Exactly.
It's so good.
There is virtue in this world that can only be expressed through life. In fact, all virtue requires life. Yes, there is suffering. Yes, there are bad things that happen. And you can't guarantee that the child you have will live a good life. There are no good guarantees, only bad. But the good infinitely outweighs the bad because that's what we were made for.
I am the daughter of a prostitute and the granddaughter of a drunk. for all intents and purposes, it would have been really stupid to bring a child into that. But here I am.
And it's good that they did.
It's good that they did.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to subscribe and share and leave a positive review. And if you would like to connect with us on social media, you can do so on Instagram and Facebook at The Logic of God. You can also send us an email at main.thelogicofgod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We hope you have a great day.